Good day. This is the morning meeting. Welcome. Thank you for joining. Sean Dan and I are here to guide you through the mysticies and magics of today on the schedule after a big, busy weekend that included the Army-Navy game, or is now known the Navy-Army game. Welcome, gentlemen. Sean, how was the game?
It was awesome. Obviously Navy won, which made it great. It was just a lot of good people, a lot of good conversation. It's just there's something about that game that makes you proud to be an American. And then of course Navy won, which made it even better.
Did you get FaceTime with the most powerful man in the world, Elon Musk?
No, it's funny. So when we went into, I've been with him twice, not with him, but with Trump. I've never seen security like it was this time.
Yeah.
They were like hermetically sealed. Um, it was unreal what the difference is between 2016, 2019, and now. And frankly, even Mar-a-Lago, when I went down there, I think I mentioned this a few weeks back, the level of security since the assassination attempt
Yeah.
has been unbelievable. By the way, lunch with Belichick, awesome. Uh, Bill Belichick and 6 Medal of Honor recipients, not a bad lunch.
Yeah. No one can blame the service for overcorrecting, but they have really gone in a massive direction. Every time I'm anywhere near a protectee now, you can see it's quite intense.
Right.
Dan, any football in your weekend you want to tell us about or anything else?
No, no, just as a sports fan, though, it is on my bucket list to attend the Army Navy game one day. I have been to West
Well,
Point, though, for a game when the cadets march in, and that's pretty awesome.
yeah, Navy's going to a home game at either stadium is phenomenal.
Yep.
Next year's going to be in Baltimore for the game. That's what made it really cool this year because it was in. I mean, it's technically in Maryland, but it was just everybody in the DC area went that is from a military background, and it was the woman going up to the suite level. I was talking to her for a while, and she said, "I've never." She's like, "I just met Russell Brand. I met the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I met," and she's listening it off. And she goes, "I've been working here 20 years. I've never met so many people in my life."
All right, everybody, welcome to the morning meeting. As I said, this program is, well, I wouldn't say unique. It's special. We
Oh,
are
it's
going to
unique.
run through. Okay, we're going to run through what's going on today, then kick it around. If you're watching on YouTube, excited to have you here. Not excited for you to pollute the chat. So peace, love, and understanding is what we're all about here, trying to create a sense of community in America around the morning meeting and other two-way programming. So thank you for joining. And if you're thinking putting crap in the chat, don't. And if you're here on the two-way platform, amazing. Please raise your hand to be part of the conversation. We like returning heroes. We also like new people. So if you've never been part of the conversation, regardless of what your political orientation is, please raise your hand and get in the conversation. In a moment, we will come to you after I run through the day, and then these two gentlemen explain it all. Um, President Biden at the White House, 10 o'clock, receives his intelligence briefing. 12:15, he attends an event with the acting Secretary of Labor, Julie Su, honoring the nation's labor history. She's been acting secretary for quite some time, Julie Su. And then he hosts a
Actually,
Hanukkah.
by the way, total side note, there's an anomaly for the Labor Department with
Correct.
respect to, yeah. So it's
She can be
interesting
there.
little political
Yes,
trip.
correct. All right. 7:45, the president hosts a Hanukkah reception. Jill Biden and Doug Emhoff attend. The vice president of the United States, who we'll discuss on today's episode, she'll be in Washington, D.C., where she will receive briefings and conduct internal meetings with staff. These meetings will be, you guessed it, close press. The First Lady is doing a virtual thank you event for educators with the two major teachers unions at 6:30, and then she's part of that Hanukkah reception at 7:45. Donald Trump is delivering remarks this morning at some time, not sure when, with the CEO of SoftBank about SoftBank investment in the U.S. Expect a lot more events like this. Not sure what J.D. Vance is up to today on the Hill. They're trying to figure out the pass some sort of spending bill to keep the government from shutting down. Everybody says they will, but you never know because there's always a chance of an error and a miscalculation. So we shall see. But they're supposed to finish that by the weekend. Meantime, courtesy calls for Mr. Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard, mostly with Republican members of the Senate. Pete Hegseth, no courtesy calls today. We're told he's doing murder boards. Dan, what are murder boards?
Murder boards where you sit at a conference table and people try to rough you up with questions, see if they can get you to lose your cool. ask as probing, whether it's personal or professional or substantive questions as possible, and kind of, prepare you for the worst and hope for the best.
Sean, what's the best murder board story you got?
I don't know that it's the best, but during 2016, we were going through actually the best one is when we had Neil Gorsuch over in the old executive office building, and they pushed him to a limit. I mean, that's the goal, is to throw somebody somebody streaks through, not naked, of course, but through the event, holding a banner up. The idea is to get the nominee familiar with those kind of utterances that can happen. And it was just funny how, you really watch how this can get under somebody's skin. I'll leave it at that. But
Yeah. So one thing you want to practice is unexpectedly you throw a pie in the face of the nominee, and the nominee goes like this. Boysenberry. That's how you finesse that. All right. So let's talk about the day here. Something happened over the weekend, but I want to project forward of the implications. ABC News giving $15 million to the library of Donald Trump
nice of
and
them.
paying the lawyers' fees because George Stephanopoulos said something about Donald Trump that wasn't true. Most people are surprised. You don't normally see this kind of settlement. Sean, what are the implications of this settlement for ABC, for Trump camp administration, and for the media?
I think for Team Trump, it's excellent, right? I mean, it's a scalp. I remember when everybody remembers Anthony Scaramucci. One of the reasons that he came on as big as he did on the president's radar was he sued CNN, and they had to issue a formal apology. There's something about getting media outlets to apologize, and in this case, to make a massive donation to the president's library, soon to be library, that really is a big deal for Team Trump, and I understand why, of course. But so this is a major scalp. Second, I think there's broader implications for the media because you are seeing, and I think you will see more lawsuits going on. It started. You saw a lot with Smartmatic and Dominion going after some of the conservative news things, and then the thing that I find fascinating about this, Mark, is that there's always been this very high bar for public figures. The New York Times decision that the court came out with. And it's clearly now starting to hit a level where when you talk to a lawyer and you're a public figure and you say, this guy just maligned me, and they go, well, we got to prove intent and you got to do this, and we're going to have to go through discovery, and this is going to cost you a ton. And you go, forget it then. So you're starting to see a design. Like, I think you're going to see more people say, look, we can win, and they'll settle or whatever, because the key in all of this, in my opinion, is the discovery process. So they're going to go through your emails, your texts, your records, and say, oh, see, look, you said that Dan Turrentine was a really bad person and whatever, and now we're going to use that. Or maybe even Dan said, in the middle of this, oh, the bosses are horrible people, and the network doesn't want that to get out. So they'll settle sometimes for a variety of reasons, but I think you're going to see a lot more of this coming in the next few years.
Dan, is this decision by ABC good for America, bad for America?
Oh, it's good for America. I mean, the way people would talk about Trump the last 9 years, rhetoric obviously got very hot. People conflated information. In this instance, the difference between, I think it was assault and rape, very big difference. And to Sean's point, what happened in the Dominion case, where all these personalities, all the terrible things they said about Donald Trump, and the contesting 2020 was humiliating for the network. It was humiliating for some of those stars. And so I think if it holds people more accountable, that's good about what they say about public figures.
Yeah, and it's funny. Tim in the chat is saying, Trump needs to let them be good journalists. There is a difference. I am for a tough and fair media, right? They should hold you accountable. But when they speculate and lie and demean, like that's not good journalism. That's not good for anyone. When you read a story saying somebody did something, you assume as the reader or viewer that that's true because the journalist wrote it. When that was based off innuendo or speculation, that's not good journalism, and it impugns the character of an individual that might have long-lasting implications for them. So I think that this is very good. It holds them accountable. It makes them rethink when they print something. Do I have this right? What impact am I going to have on somebody's life? I mean, I know this is not a reporter thing, but this isn't something we normally talk about, but this Duke issue that came up where the woman recanted her entire story and said, I made it up. Those individuals' lives have been forever changed. And I know that the media isn't necessarily, but like when you make allegations against somebody, they're forever tarred, especially in the internet age when you can't just undo it. So I think that the idea that we're going to keep the media, that they have to think in the back of their mind, am I right on this, is a good thing.
The only thing I'd amend to that is I'd like them to think about it on the front of their mind, not the back of their mind.
Fair enough. You can't understate that, Mark.
You cannot understate it. This is a corrective to not just about Donald Trump, but a willingness to level accusations using the power of their platform that are false. And the only thing about this case that's a little bit troubling to me is I think he just misspeaking repeatedly. I think he just got in his head that those were the facts. But if it takes $15 million and an apology to send a message to people, you cannot be reckless with the reputations of people, even if they're public officials. I think that's great. Some in the press are casting this as part of a Team Trump conspiracy to start trying to intimidate the media. And I hope that doesn't happen. But people shouldn't say because they're worried about that people should be allowed to speak falsely about people, even people in public life. All right. What are you guys looking for this week? Just in general, what's one thing? Dan, you first. What's one thing in this holiday-ish week? Sean, what's the problem? You got two things you want to say?
Yeah, I didn't know we were going to narrow it to one. I have two.
All right, you can do two. Dan, you can do as many as you want because Sean's doing two. What's on your radar?
I don't know. Actually, Sean, I only have one, so I'll tee this up to you.
Do your one.
I think the biggest thing here is, does Trump make a decision about next year in terms of the legislative process to start enacting this his agenda? Because you were seeing over the weekend and you're seeing today, Republicans are getting anxious. Like to pass bills takes time. To tee things up, to put the coalitions together takes time. And they're chomping at the bit because they're all terrified of Trump to say or do the wrong thing. So everyone is looking for direction from the president-elect. And I think according to reports, he is going to say what he would like to do. If he doesn't, that is a kind of under the radar sign of like potential chaos and disarray again as they get ready for 2.0 here.
Great. Sean.
Luckily, Dan took one of my two. But I will add, Dan's absolutely right. I mean, the number of industries that could happen in either one or two reconciliation bills, which is what my guess is the president today announces the 2-track reconciliation process as a means of both reducing the deficit, spurring economic growth, renewing the tax cuts, dealing with the border, et cetera. But if you're in major industry in America right now, or frankly, even a transnational corporation, these two bills are where your lobbyists are going to earn every penny that they've, that you're paying them, all of them, which is probably a bad analogy. It's more like $100 bills that they're paying them. So that to me, this is going to be huge, how this comes down the pike. And Dan's right, building that coalition, building support, building public interest is going to be huge because there's going to be major opposition to it as well. The second thing that I was going to be looking for is, we had Hegseth go through the barrel. RFK, we mentioned briefly, is going to be up on the Hill this week, but this is going to be a real, to me, an interesting dynamic because does he cross party lines? Do a couple Dem senators come out and state their support for Bobby? I think that he is going to get a lot more support than people might completely, that he might get a lot more support than meets the eye.
Yeah.
Well, and Sean, I think it'll be interesting because he's the first nominee where the problem may be with the right base, not that middle Murkowski-Collins crew. But like if, let's say 3 or 4 Democrats come on board, would 1 or 2 Republicans, if he doesn't answer on choice or won't vote against him to kind of like put a marker down for their own like base politics?
Yeah, they would, except, I think I mentioned this last week, that the life groups are not out there beating the drum the way that they've been reassured that on these issues that Trump's stance will will be the one that's guiding all of the policy. So I think if Susan B. Anthony or something like that came out very strong, then I'd be concerned. But in lieu of that, I think they're in lockstep.
All right. So along this question of confirmation, Tom Tillis, senator from North Carolina, was on Fox News Sunday. He's an interesting case. He's up for re-election in the next cycle. It's a kind of state where, in theory, he's susceptible to a primary challenge. He's had some votes in the past that MAGA hasn't liked, but he's also unafraid to do what he thinks is right, more than some, and thinks he can still win a primary even if he does some things that are against MAGA. So listen to what he said about outside efforts to intimidate Republican senators to keep them in line and not voting against Trump nominees. 101, please.
Here's what I would tell them. If they really support President Trump's nominees, they should stand down and let the nominees win on their own merits, and I think most of them will. President Trump had a good experience in his first term as president in terms of enjoying the support of Republicans. He should expect it again. But if people want to play the outside game, then they run a lot of risk. 4 votes are all it's going to take to kill a nomination here. So they should take pause, do the work, build a compelling case.
So interesting thesis that the outside game will only backfire. I don't think that's the case, although it can. As the transition folks are pointing out, there's not a single Republican senator on the record opposed to any of the nominees. And what I'm looking for this week is to see if Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard, who are both on the Hill doing courtesy calls, if they are now given the same courtesy that Hegseth is given, which is no one opposes until the hearing. So that gives you the opportunity to get through the background check, line up your allies, get before the committee, make your case without having to deal with no's. I suspect that will be the case, and I suspect there won't be very much outside activity against them. Guys, what do you think of that?
Unless there's a story that drops. I mean, like right now, they've got calm waters ahead of them, right? There's nothing new that's happening. They had a good weekend. It's when the bombshell comes that I think we might have an issue.
Dan?
Yeah, I think the issue is, I think a lot of these senators felt pretty good when Matt Gaetz stepped down. And they're like, okay, we channeled privately our discomfort. He dropped. Trump didn't put up much of a fight. So, we have leverage here. We have some power. And I think Hegseth has reminded them, or the process with Hegseth is, you have no power. To your point, Mark, until somebody stands up and publicly says no, then I think this is all kind of like complaining. It's interesting he did it on Fox, of all places. But I think I actually would imagine there will be a Democrat come out for RFK in the not too distant future. And I think that'll just move the train right along.
All right. Again, if you want to get in the conversation and you're here on the two-way platform, please, everyone who would like to get in, please raise your hand. What's happening in the lame duck session that you think offers some clues for 2025, if anything? Sean.
So Senate's taking up the National Defense Authorization Act today. I mean, that's technically the lame duck session, but I think it should probably be fine going through. The spending bill to me is going to be a real insight into where we are in terms of who gets on board and who doesn't, because you're in this awkward balance right now of, do we want Trump to have to inherit a mess? Do we not? Do we suck it up? Do we fight the fight? Do we get sold a bill of goods that some of these things are going to get taken care of if we can just get through this phase? So I think the spending thing, that's my guess, is that it's spending and done. There's a lot of disappointment, by the way, that the Online Kids Act did not get passed. And the Speaker Johnson I mean, I've never seen a group of conservatives get behind something with a group of Democrats. I mean, this is hardcore conservatives, Marsha Blackburn, et cetera. You had even the outside groups get on board on this, and then Johnson torpedo it. It was kind of an odd dynamic to see all of these groups get on board. So I don't think that that's going to get resurrected during the lame duck, but I will say that was an odd dynamic that happened.
Dan.
Yeah, I think the big thing here is when you start putting big bills together like this, you have to horse trade. And when you have like the Freedom Caucus and others who historically just cause problems, they like to get to know. It's like good for their brand. It's good to go on TV because you're like, we should have fought harder. We should have done more. They're weak. They cut deals. So when you think about next year, one of the reasons they don't want two reconciliation bills, that some want to put everything together, is what the lame duck is teaching us is Trump is going to have to use his capital to hold this thing together. Like when you have a 1-seat majority in the House, you have a 3 or 4-seat in the Senate. Trump is going to have to be the enforcer and the kind of the apparatus around him to keep everybody in line. The worry that Republicans have is by the summer of next year, does he still have maximum power? Does he start to bleed capital down to cut deals? And if you do, and you're having two different bills, that second one becomes a challenge. It's going to be weaker than it normally would be because he's starting to burn capital down. And so I think what you're seeing in trying to get this lame duck done is even now, Johnson and Thune are looking to Trump. What should we do? Like, will you help us keep everybody in line? And that is putting a lot of pressure on Trump when you think about next year, that this is all on him because everyone in his conference is fearful of him.
Yeah, although again, it's an unusual situation because you say horse trading, it's all or nothing. There's no horse trading. Every Republican in the House and nearly everyone in the Senate will have to vote for whatever emerges or it won't pass. And
well,
so,
but what it is a set of horse trades about what you include in it.
To some extent, but in the end, it's all or nothing. It's not like, well, we'll give these 7, Northeastern Republicans a pass because they can't vote for it. Everybody's got to vote for it.
Well,
so whatever the package, it's different. I understand there still will be horse trading. There still will be negotiation. But what I'm saying is normally you're making a calculation. What do we include to get to the majority? That's not a calculation. We have to get to the majority because everybody has to vote for it. There's no margin of error. So it's just different.
Unless you're incentive, and unless you're from a competitive area and your priorities are not in there, and therefore you have a vested interest in not being you're going to go down either way, right? So you got to pick your poison. I mean, I'm just saying, like, I think it will be harder than just, hey, everyone has to be for. I mean, even Democrats had that with healthcare and everything else when they said the same argument. Everyone's got to be for this. We got to do this.
Yeah. Keep an eye out, folks, for the SoftBank event because it looks like they're setting up and it may happen during our program. So we'll dip into that if it does. The CEO of SoftBank announcing that they're going to invest $100 billion in the next 4 years in the United States. All right. Vice President Harris, big story in CNN yesterday, Washington Post today about her future. Talk of running for governor of California, running for president again in 28. Can't really do both if you win the governor's race, or doing something else. I want to show you 2 paragraphs from the Washington Post story. 102 first, please. Both stories, I would say, were pretty bullish on Kamala Harris's prospects compared to what my sources say. Quote, she proved the skeptics wrong about her abilities as a political athlete, said Brian Fallon, a former Harris campaign spokesman. A very smart guy, Brian Fallon.
Yep.
He claims to believe that she proved her skeptics wrong. And then next paragraph, 103. Many aides and allies say that if Harris sought the presidency again, her candidacy would resemble 2024 far more than 2019. That's when she ran, lost the nomination before a vote was cast. The more centrist, confident Harris voters saw during the general election is more in line with her true self, they said. So this piece says she's not gotten very much criticism. That's true. Dan, more centrist and confident. Did you look at Kamala Harris as centrist and confident in this campaign?
I looked at her as neither of those things. I think the problem, look, for Harris, her future is murky for 2 reasons. One is her brand. Okay, so they're arguing that, in fact, she's truly moderate. Candidates who have run 3 times and been successful, Ronald Reagan, let's say Donald Trump now, have been consistent with each of those campaigns, and the country has kind of come towards them, or in Trump's instance, kind of came back towards him. But there was never this, like, I was a liberal, then I was a moderate, like I ping-ponged around. So she would have to attempt to kind of like, take 2, stamp out 2019 and spend an entire year in town halls and other things saying why that is not really who she is. And this is really, really who she believes that she is. The second thing is, from a mechanic standpoint, she did not raise $1.5 billion. The opponent of Donald Trump raised $1.5 billion, and it happened to be her. Both the grassroots was not, hopping up and down with excitement over Kamala Harris, and nor were major donors. Like, if anything, the major donors held their nose and would leave events and shake their head and call reporters and say, my God, she's so blah, she won't answer our questions, etc. When there was no alternative other than Trump, they kept writing checks. So I don't think she would have nearly the fundraising power that she had this first time, or this second time here. And the other thing is, what is her base? What is her coalition of either voters or kind of muscle in the party that you say, okay, they're going to be behind her, and I don't know how we get around that to get to a winning formula. You could maybe argue older black women are her strength, but all the rest of the segments of the party were lukewarm at best about her. So I just don't see why anyone would fear her, certainly for president. And I even think if she runs for governor of California, she will be challenged in a primary.
Sean.
Yeah. So first, with all due respect to Brian Fallon, the only way she's a strong political athlete is if billiards is a sport. Secondly, I've seen plenty of people do both. She could easily drive Uber and Lyft. I've been working on that all weekend. Look, I don't think that there's anybody that walked away impressed with her campaign internally. And
let me stop and ask you a question about that. Okay. The three of us, I think it's incumbent upon us to think anew and to be open to the notion that maybe we're too harsh in our appraisal, even though it's the appraisal of nearly everyone I know. How is it that CNN and the Washington Post write stories that say she's largely escaped responsibility, she's got in late, it was all the environment? Like, why are those news organizations still contributing to the mythology that she was a good candidate? I'm asking, I'm serious. Do you guys have any idea? Like, why would they do that?
It's funny. I read Cleve Woodson. Is that it? Cleve Woodson's story in the Post. And it's,
well, he didn't write the Kamala story.
Story,
I think he wrote something else. The Kamala, he wrote like a Biden story, I think.
Right.
The Kamala story was written by Maeve Reston and Ashley Parker.
I mean, I think part of it is
what's in it? What's in it for a report? I'm asking seriously.
The only thing is that they have to admit they were wrong, right? So the reporters that bought into it, the Ashley Parkers and everyone else from the Washington Post, the New York Times, at some point they have to say, I was wrong. I touted her prowess. I said their campaign ground game was excellent. I said that Trump sucked. And so to write a story that says she was bad is in direct contradiction to what I wrote earlier this campaign. And I think that it's a hard hill to climb if you're one of them.
I also just think that there's a feeling in the party that, like, we're in the wilderness, we got our butts kicked, and like Trump's dominating right now, and then we'll kind of deal with the future in the new year. And nobody kind of wants to pile on her. And even the Biden criticism, I think, is actually fairly soft right now. I think, though, that in about 3 or 4 months, those who are thinking of 2028, if she's still circling around, the knives will come out. And I think you will see stories that are, handed to news organizations where people will go on background, if not on the record, and they will start systematically trying to take her down. And I think so. Right now, if you're a reporter, you got to get people to be willing to either go on the record or enough people on background to trash her. And I just get the sense nobody wants to do that. They just don't have the stomach to do it right now.
Why do I hear from so many people who?
Oh, so do I.
Well, I know, but I mean, why can't these reporters find those people? Not to gratuitously trash her, but I mean, these stories are so unrepresentative of what I believe the reality is of how she's perceived by donors. And so, for instance, Dan, you said if she runs for governor, she'll be challenged. Those stories basically say the field will be cleared for her.
Totally. No, I think look, I hear from a lot of people, including folks on that campaign, who, I've talked about this before. I took a lot of heat the last year, who have now said, yeah, you were right. And,
But I just find it confusing that people would spend the time to write a big story about whether Kamala Harris and just have the stuff in it that just I don't know. I find it confusing. All
Well, and
right.
I can also say, look, we mock a little bit of like, she's doing lots of meetings and private events and nothing is public. She is holding a ton of private meetings and celebrate and thank you events almost daily here. And I know people who have been there and have talked to her, and she makes remarks at these events, and she hangs around the rope line with Doug Emhoff, and they talk for a while. And she's definitely saying, like, I'm trying to figure out what to do. And
Yeah.
but she still speaks in platitudes and still speaks in just this kind of hopey, aspirational, and a lot of these, not a lot, some of these people leave just shaking their heads still.
Yeah. All right. Brent Buchanan's here. He's here for two reasons. One is he has not spilled a drop of hot chocolate on that clean white shirt, which is very impressive. And two, he's got data. Brent, tell folks who you are, where you and what your data is, and then just start spewing it out. And thank you for making time to join us.
Yeah, good to be with everyone this morning. So Brent Buchanan, I founded a firm called Signal. We're a private Republican polling firm, though you may have seen some of our numbers out there. And when people think of polling, usually there's negative associations with that. And I just want to separate ourselves from those pollsters because those pollsters have zero profit motive. And if we were constantly wrong like they were, we would never get hired again. And so for those of you who are not involved in kind of the campaign industry or haven't seen under the hood, there are dozens of us on both sides of the aisle that work with campaigns and help them understand what's going on, how do we get here, where do we want to go, how do we get there, what messages are going to work, who we're going to target, how is progress going against those. That's really what pollsters do. And when you see pollsters that just put out public numbers for a 10-question poll every couple of weeks, those are not really pollsters. And so they give us a bad name. We actually start every invitation to our poll as this is not for a media organization, so that we can actually build trust with the person taking our survey. And so we go in the field every month to put out some public information, just to give us something to talk about and to help share another side of multiple issues that really against what public pollsters are doing. And so our poll that came out actually is going to be released today, hasn't even been sent out. You guys are some of the first to hear it, is the fact that Donald Trump has really pulled up down ballot Republicans even further than he did in the 24 election. And what I mean by that is the number of people and the type of people who are going to vote in the 26 election, and yes, I'm already turning us to the 26 election, is a different universe of individuals than those who vote in presidential elections. And because of something called the diploma divide, which is if you are college educated, you're now essentially a Democrat. And if you're not, you're now essentially Republican. And 30 years ago, that was the inverse. That would actually harm Republicans going into new midterms. And so this interesting data right on the heels of Donald Trump's and a Republican trifecta victory actually shows that Republicans down ballot, mainly congressional Republicans, are actually doing 2 points better than they ended up at the end of the 24 election. And I just find this fascinating because I think it flies in the face of this. Republicans are going to lose special elections. They're going to do poor in the midterms because they're now the party of the working class. And Donald Trump is just a really unique individual that is beginning to transform the Republican Party, because I think up until this point, it has only been about Trump for a lot of these voters. And it's beginning to transfer to other Republicans and not just Donald Trump now that this is his last term. And another interesting point is as we look at kind of turning back to the 24 election, and these questions were Sean's idea, so I cannot take credit for this. And it was asking voters who they thought of a list of Republican influencers really impacted the election for Donald Trump, and then vice versa, who do they think Democrats influencers affected the election. What was really interesting about this, I think, just on the broad brushstrokes, are the fact that 55% of voters thought that no Democrat influencers made any impact for Kamala Harris and the Democrats. And we had people named like Taylor Swift, and we had Oprah and Beyonce and LeBron James, and like all these people who were coming out in culture and saying that were for Kamala Harris, and then you had 55% say, I don't really think any of those folks generated support for Kamala Harris. And one way to really read into that is the fact that voters don't really like being told what to do, especially when it sounds like you're dumb, I have to tell you what to do. And that kind of, in my mind, was the whole Democratic campaign is like, if you knew enough, like if you were as smart as us, you would be with Kamala Harris. But obviously you're not smart enough. And so we've got to fix that for you. And we're going to put these people that are well respected in entertainment, and they're going to tell you how to fix all of this. And you can be smart enough to vote for Kamala Harris. And then you flip over to the Republican side, and you have 47% say Elon Musk was the number one factor in driving support for Trump during the presidential election, followed by Joe Rogan and RFK Jr., both tied at 22%. And if you would have said, even 2 years ago, that those would be the three names that drove the election for Donald Trump, you would think you were on something, because those three people weren't Republicans. They weren't talking about Republicans. They weren't thinking, if anything, they were against Republicans 2 years ago. And so when you then combine that with what actually drove the election, we did an exit poll, 9,000 interviews on election day, and of people who had actually voted. And one of the most interesting things is that white voters as a whole just didn't move. College-educated white voters moved further left, non-college moved a little bit further right, but it basically kind of kept white voters leveled out. If anything, you could almost say that white voters moved a hair towards Kamala Harris. And it was the non-white vote that drove all the movement for Donald Trump in 24 compared to 2020. Well, why is that the case? Look at who these influencers are. These people are influencers online. Joe Rogan on podcasts. RFK Jr., really an online sensation because the mainstream media didn't give him any oxygen. Elon Musk, I mean, he's kind of across the board, but then when you compare that to how people consume their news and how they're voting, all these online platforms, and not just X, but streaming apps. So if you get your news from streaming apps and places like this, you voted for Donald Trump by 26 points. If you get your news from YouTube, you voted for Donald Trump by 14 points. TikTok, Kamala Harris only won TikTok news consumers by 14 points. And so you start to see how this entire ecosystem of media.
Brett, sorry to interrupt, but is that people saying that's their top source?
So when we ask that question, we ask them to pick up to three. So that way they don't have to box themselves in and say.
It's one of their three top choices.
Correct.
So someone who listed TikTok is one of their three top choices. Kamala Harris only won them by
14.
14. Amazing. Okay, sorry,
and
keep going.
Yeah, and it's an audience that if you looked at how they voted in 2020, because we always ask folks, how'd you vote in the prior election too? Those same voters were for Harris by like 30 or for Biden by 35 points. So it's not just simply people choosing to say, okay, I used to be on mainstream media and now I'm going to go get my news through alternative sources. It's actually preferential changes because of those news sources and culture on these folks. And it presents itself in this influencer question. And so all those Democrat influencers that people said mostly didn't make an impact were essentially all on mainstream media. And most of the Republican-leaning influencers were online. And I think this really breaks out a new way that elections are going to be defined. And it's not going to be who spent the most on ABC, on the broadcast channel and on the local news that's going to define elections moving forward.
Right, fascinating. Sean, go ahead. Really great stuff.
No. I'll defer to Dan. I think that's going to be a consultant's worst nightmare. What you just said, because they don't get the same cut off the bottom.
Some consultants, other consultants will.
That's right. Good point. So the thing that I think is interesting is that when you looked at the issues from the top lines I saw, the economy, immigration, all stayed at the top, but abortion and threats to democracy from October, November to now have all just gone down.
Yeah.
My take is that you kind of watch democracy in action, you think there's less of a threat to it. Maybe there's got to be something that if you just participate in the democratic process, it's hard to then say it's under attack.
Well, Sean, it's similar to what you and I were talking about on, I think it was Friday that we chatted through this, was that when you spend money on something, especially billions of dollars, it is going to raise the salience of the issue. And if the issue doesn't have enough legs and strength on its own, and if it's not a natural thing that people are caring and thinking about, then when the money stops going towards it, the attention stops going towards it. And these issues that the Republicans were running on are things at the very base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Do I have shelter? Can I provide for my family? Is there food? Is there clothing? Am I going to have a job tomorrow? Am I going to have this? Am I going to have a way to get to work? All these things were at the very base, and I really think the illegal immigration fits into that too. And then when you looked at Democrats' issues, it was threats to democracy, it was abortion, it was climate change, it was these luxury issues that are at the very top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The only thing they have left is self-actualization. And when you quit putting money towards those things, and it's not something that is affecting somebody's daily life and their ability to exist and to provide, then it falls to the wayside. And Democrats put so much money and effort in this last week of the presidential campaign. I mean, you saw it when Harris, with the White House behind her on the ellipse, was essentially giving the Trump is Adolf Hitler 2.0 speech. That is when her polling started declining. Our exit poll showed that 10% of the folks made their decision in the last week, so after the Hitler speech, and they significantly were Donald Trump voters in the end. And so it was just very tone deaf in my mind. And of course, if you can't tell, I'm a partisan pollster, that they just weren't listening to what normal people were saying. They were only listening to what their new base is, which is coastal elites.
Dan.
So was there, sorry.
Go ahead, Dan.
Was there in that, it's interesting that the 10% who made up their mind in the last week, did you get information about whether the reason for their vote was that they were turned off by Harris? They found Trump, like they just said, okay, the economy was great under him, we trust him more. Was it a combination? Did you get any sort of reason for that late break?
Not in the exit poll, but we did in the survey from last week ask if somebody was a first-time voter. And a lot of those folks who decided in the last week, this was their first time participating. And 30% of them said, I vote for Donald Trump because I support him. 23% say I voted for Harris because I support her. And then you kind of had a mix of I voted for Trump because I was against Harris or for Harris. I mean, I really think that it honestly gets back to the fact that people are really bad at assigning reasons to their motives because our motives are so emotional and guttural. And we have to think about why we made a decision after we made the decision. But I really think it comes down to the issues of illegal immigration and inflation economy. And then I think there was actually a large cultural aspect of it too. Because if you look at communities of color, especially men in communities of color under the age of 45, they're very attuned to these cultural issues, and they actually don't like some of the woke progressive things the Democrats have leaned into significantly. And so I think it was a smattering of all those things. And if you try to ask somebody what actually caused them to make their decision, you're going to get a made up response.
Well, one thing I thought was interesting was this interview Rob Flaherty, the deputy campaign manager for Harris, who oversaw digital, gave this weekend, was he said that they tried to get on a lot of these podcasts and work with influencers who would not work with them because they were queasy that their audience was not a fan of the Democratic Party, and they were very hesitant to have Harris or somebody like her on, which would go to the idea that culturally their audience is disconnected from the party. And they're business people.
And at least the way I read that Flaherty quote was that he was saying they were specifically really trying to get on a sports podcast, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
All right, Brett, stay with us if you can, because I'm hoping folks have questions for you. I'm grateful to you for joining and sharing all that great data. Richard, welcome in. Tell folks where you are and what's on your mind, please, after you unmute.
No, I think you're muted, Richard.
Still muted, Richard. There you go.
Good morning, Mark. I just posted something in the comments. I hope this doesn't seem like a gratuitous self-plug, but I have a commentary on American greatness this morning, an open letter to RFKJ saying that as soon as he is confirmed and Trump takes office, that moves should be made to ban big pharma advertising on at least network television. We banned cigarette advertising in the 1970s, why can't this obvious conflict of interest be addressed today? So my question is out to both of you, all three of you. What are your feelings on this topic?
Yeah, great question. First Amendment's pretty important, but as you pointed out, it's been waived in the past for particular products. Sean, what do you think about banning pharma ads?
Yeah, you bring up a good point, Mark. I'm conflicted on this because I do believe in free speech, and I feel like we go down a slippery slope. But I think, even when you go in and you talk to your doctor, I've asked this before. There are too many people who walk in and say, "Can I have fill in the blank because I saw the ad?" Which is driving so much of this. We have a very pill-based healthcare system, which is you've got a problem, we'll give you a pill, not what will solve the problem. And I think that's what RFK is really getting. We talk about root causes. We need to figure out how to get to the root causes of so many of the issues that ail us as a society. So I'm not opposed to it because I think right now they've gone to the extreme. But I will tell you, the thing that's fascinating is watch Politico Playbook, watch Axios, look at who sponsors so many of these events, so many of these newsletters. And I got to tell you, Mark's the one with journalism background, but if you are writing every day and you see that the person that's paying for your paycheck is Big Pharma, you really going to come after them? I have a hard time believing that that's not in the back or front of your mind. Thank you, Mark. And,
Can't
so I
understand.
just got to believe that this is going to be a big fight because they make too much money off of these ads these days.
Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, I can definitely confirm that a lot of people in DC's advertising, it is surprising how they do not criticize those who advertise and at times criticize competitors. And it's sometimes made known to you when they're pitching to you. Look, I think this is a slippery slope. I'm actually against banning the advertising. I mean, look, when Democrats leaned on social media companies to not put out what they thought was COVID misinformation, a lot of people got upset. And it turned out, later on that some of that stuff wasn't misinformation. There might have been some grains of salt. But anytime the government starts trying to pick winners and losers and saying, your speech is not right, you are, I just think it's a very, very slippery slope, and government doesn't do that well. So I would rather err on free speech and let voters make up their own minds. Because look, you also have the issue that doctors in some instances make recommendations, and if you take that recommendation, they are compensated for stuff. And so just the healthcare system has challenges that need to be fixed, but getting into banning speech to me is not a good idea.
Brent, my guess would be, there may not be any data, but my guess would be if you ask people, should big pharmaceutical companies be banned from advertising, that would be like 80-20.
Highly likely, mainly because we're sick of seeing the dogs jump around for an hour, a full minute while they tell us all the consequences of the drugs. But I'll tie this back to polling for a second. The group that's really beginning to define elections is younger voters. And historically, that meant bad for Republicans. But this is a group, especially the lower income, lower educational attainment folks. It's a more diverse group. They represent about 15 to 20% of the electorate. And this audience is beginning to wake up to a lot of these things. And it's why they really went towards RFK Jr.'s candidacy when he was an independent before he joined Trump. I think it's a lot of the reason that they ended up voting for Trump, even though they may not personally like him, is this whole thing that everything is rigged against you is a very comforting thing if you feel like nothing's going well and right in your life. And so these targets are really just targets. They're symptoms. They're not the source of the problem. And I think that's what Trump and others like RFK Jr. have really been able to tap into, is this discontent.
Richard, thank you. Appreciate
Dan,
it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Richard. Finish up. Unmute again. Got to unmute again, Richard. I apologize.
Usually I'm a First Amendment absolutist, so I would normally agree with you. But this has become such an issue in that now Ozempic, as an example, is used as a weight loss drug. That's the good side effect of it. And that, to me, we need to look at that more carefully than we are right now. Your thought?
Well,
It just not every ill in our society, I think, is best solved by banning speech. In fact, I think very few things are. And these drugs, most of
So,
these drugs are FDA approved, so they obviously are seen to have some societal benefit. That's different than
so
cigarettes.
I think the problem is, Mark, I'm with you. My default is free speech. The problem is that you also have drug companies that get basically immunity from lawsuits, right? So you can't have it both ways. They kind of want the best of everything. So my point is, kind of like the beginning of this discussion with the media, where you've got to have some degree of accountability. If they want to advertise, then you got to be able to sue them, right?
Yep.
So they've got the perfect storm of everything right now. They can advertise, they can't be sued. There's no accountability. They get pipelines into the federal government. I mean, you can't get it all. And that's where
Yeah.
I find I'm willing to make some things. It says, great, you want to be able to advertise till the days come home, then fine, give up your immunity, allow people to sue you when you do bad things. And also, I mean, the more that you go down the trail, you've seen, without getting, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole now, but I will just say that when you start realizing what happens when a drug gets put on the federal schedule, right? Which is Medicare, Medicaid, and what that does, why these drugs want to be on there, because then the federal government is subsidizing a drug like Wegovy, which is the weight loss equivalent of, from Novo Nordisk, of Ozempic. They want that because now the federal government is going to subsidize to the tune of billions of dollars. So this is all a game to get people on the federal, to get drugs on the federal schedule. And
well, but let's also be clear, though, that, with Ozempic, there are millions of people whose lives are materially better. The healthcare costs of obesity are coming down. I hear you that was not the intent of Ozempic, that to be a weight loss drug, but there are millions of people who are having material impacts to their life who will live longer because somebody experimented with this as a weight loss drug and it turned out to work. I'll also just say, as a side note, if Trump wants to win blue cities, he would not ban Ozempic. There'd be a riot here in New York City. I'm making.
Well, it's funny. Just two side notes. One is there was big discussion prior to the 2020 about going after vaping, specifically menthol, whatever. The campaign came back with data and said, hey, you go after this, you're going to get crushed. So Dan's right. You always have to think about who it's going to affect. Unfortunately, politics matter. The one thing I will say, and I'll just end on this, is that I'm with Dan. Like, the problem right now with our healthcare system is, until you get type 2 diabetes, we won't give you a drug. The second you get type 2 diabetes, we'll give you Wegovy or Ozempic to get it back down. So you have to get sick to get help. We're not addressing the underlying causes. Why are you overweight? What's driving you to get type 2 diabetes? If all you're doing is giving someone a pill and saying, keep eating the way you are, which is why people are losing muscle mass, not fat, then you end up creating a masking of the system, which is, yes, you might not be as fat anymore, but you're still going to get type 2 diabetes. So we need to address healthcare, to use the Kamala phrase, at its root cause, which is, why is there a nutrition problem? Why are we not getting healthier?
Yeah. Richard, thank you for the great topic. Thank you. Appreciate it. David, welcome, and tell folks where you are, what's on your mind, please.
Oregon, and I finally got around to looking at that podcast from New York Times, the look back at the election the other day, and I've had some thoughts on this. I want to hear what you guys think. I think Hillary, going all the way back to 2016, Hillary, and then again in 2024, Harris were uniquely bad candidates, I thought. I mean, I think it was horrible. So I think Biden being not running in 2016 could have possibly, I think he would have beat Trump in 2016. That would have changed the whole dynamic. But having them push out, Dean, this last time, no, not the last time, in 20, but they've been pushed. Sanders. And then, it just seems like you watch the debates and the Republicans had 13 guys up there, 10. It was ridiculous. It was embarrassing. And I'm a Republican. It was embarrassing to watch all those people, but it really thinned the herd and had some buy-in from the electorate. And looking back, it just looks like, maybe Obama, I'm guessing Obama forced Biden to the sidelines in 2016. Do you guys, is that what happened?
Yeah,
I imagine he made that deal in 12.
He did. Well, a little later, but yeah.
So, but that's my thoughts on that. I was surprised Major Garrett, Jonathan Carl, and even Van Jones seemed like they were coming around to like actually speaking what like some truth to what they're seeing, what everybody's saying. But it does seem like the people, the paid advocates, still aren't coming around to what is actually happening in their party.
David, all really interesting. Do you have a question you want to ask?
No, I just wanted you to speak on that. And
okay, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, I also think the Obamas didn't just push out Biden in 16. The Clintons, I think, also made it known that if he got in, there was going to be fair game on a lot of things. And between the two of them, he decided not to run. Look, I think if you go back now for the last couple of election cycles, Clinton, even Biden in 20 and Harris in 24, they didn't the only animating like principle really was like a hatred of Trump. I mean, Hillary just wanted to be president because I think she thought it was her turn, and she had like 90 policy proposals that were sliced and diced and cut, and like all these little tactical segments that she thought was going to get her a coalition to get elected. I think, you know, obviously Biden, why he ran is well known, but I think the party is lacking an agenda. It doesn't really know why it wants power these days and what it really wants to accomplish. And I think that, you know, Trump was pretty clear about what he wanted to do. And the party's going to have to, you know, future candidates, I think, if they're successful, are going to have a new theory of the case and a new set of ideas to address the concerns that are out there that voters have.
I would just say real quick, I think that it's a great question you're asking. The level of resentment in Biden world, and look, I'm no Biden.
Yeah, you can see that.
It just, I get it too. I mean, the guy's always been like sort of the under, but the reason I think it's a fascinating question is there's an element of it in Trump too, which is, you know, Mark and I, we were talking about this last week with Dan, like why he loves Time Magazine, the New York Times, and 60 Minutes is that there's an element of respect me. I won. You know, you're my hometown paper or whatever. And you go back to Biden, and he has had this sense of, you know, I've earned this. I don't need to be told I can't run or that I can't win. And I get it. There's something inside of people that who've been put down, who succeed, that they want that level of respect that's due them.
Brent, have you seen anything in the data that suggests Joe Biden would have won if he'd stayed in the race?
I actually think he would have performed better than Harris. Because
you do
$1.5 billion forgives many sins. And he also can still appeal to a working class voter in Pennsylvania in a way that she cannot. And so I think in some of these places, we did a survey and then focus groups of the two bellwether counties in Pennsylvania, which are Erie and Northampton. And we had Trump winning both of those by 1. And I think he ended up winning the state by one and some change. And those counties have traditionally tracked, especially Northampton, for the last 100 years. It's voted the correct way of whoever won that state and whoever wins the presidency. And so you began to see that she was really struggling with some of these voter groups in areas like Erie, Northampton County, Pennsylvania. And then I also think that there's a piece to it of the minority vote, because you go look at the undervote in Philadelphia comparatively to Biden. And I don't think that was just lots of extra mail-in votes because of the judges wholesale changed voting laws without proper process in 2020, and Democrats did a good job taking advantage of it. I think part of it was attributable to that, maybe a third. But I think the other 2/3 is like they also just didn't see her as a relatable individual, and they actually saw Joe Biden as a more relatable Democrat than her. And so they stayed home.
Amazing. David,
That's
thank
really
you for the
interesting.
question, David. Thank you, David. Brett, thanks for joining us. We hope you'll come back regularly whenever you've got what Sean likes to call fresh and hot data.
It's like buns in the oven, fresh and hot.
Yeah. Brett,
All right,
thank you.
you.
Appreciate it. Tonight on Two-Way Tonight, we have two of our favorites together. I don't think they've ever been on our program, at least together. Republican strategist Christian Davidson and Tricia McLaughlin will join us to kick around the day's events and take your questions. So please make time at 6 p.m. Eastern this evening, and we'll reconvene and talk about what's gone on between now And then, thank you very much. Sean, closing statements. You have 30 seconds. Thank
I
the
yield to
Academy.
the gentleman from New York. I've
right.
given my
You've given
statement.
statement. Dan, closing
I'm thinking
statements. You
about
have
what
30
Brent
seconds.
just said about Joe Biden performing better. I mean, that's really surprising to me after that debate. But
it's in the abstract. If he'd stayed in and continued to screw stuff up, then maybe not. But there's reason to believe that's correct. And let's see what maybe we'll hear from Brian Fallon, a critique of the program. Didn't like our critique of.
I asked Brian to come on. I mean,
yeah. Brian will be on some. Brian will be on Sunday. All right. The three of us will be back 9 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow. I'll be back at 6 p.m. tonight with those two folks. And we hope you all have a great day. Thank you for joining. Bye-bye.